The blood hit the floor before he did. Not a drip, a smear, like something had been dragged, and that something was Khyven. 3:07 a.m. The bar had been closed for hours. The lock on the side door was old, and he'd learned a long time ago that old locks gave way if you hit them exactly right. He didn't break into that bar to survive. He broke in because he had nowhere left to die quietly. His feet were bare. The asphalt outside had already taken care of them. Both soles raw, the left one torn open at the heel. He didn't feel it anymore. He'd stopped feeling a lot of things. The inside of the bar smelled like spilled liquor and wood polish and something underneath both of those things that he couldn't name. He crawled past the bar stools, past the upturned chairs sitting on tabletops, past the faint amber glow of the exit sign that cast everything in a color that looked too much like fire. He made it behind the counter. That was as far as his body was willing to go. He pressed his back against the cabinet under the register. His shirt, if you could still call it that, was soaked through on the left side. He didn't look at it. Looking made it real, and real was something he couldn't afford right now. His hands were shaking, not from fear, from cold. The floor was concrete under the rubber mats, and the cold moved up through his palms like it had somewhere to be. He pulled his knees to his chest. He didn't cry. He hadn't cried in 2 years. He just breathed. In. Sometimes people don't run towards safety. They run away from being found. That's different. One is about hope. The other is about not wanting to be a problem anymore. Not for yourself, not for the world, and not for whoever owns the paperwork with your name on it. Khyven knew exactly what was on his paperwork. He knew exactly what they'd do when they found him. And they would find him. They always found him. He let his head fall back against the cabinet, eyes half open. The ceiling above him was dark. A ceiling fan hung motionless. There were bottles lined up on the back shelf, browns and golds and clears, all of them quiet in the dark. He thought about how still everything was, how strange that felt. His whole life had been noise, commands, rules he didn't choose, a list of things that belonged to other people starting with him. But right now, for just this 1 minute, it was quiet. He could feel the warmth of his own blood soaking into the floor mat beneath him. Warm and cold at the same time, like the moment before something ends. He closed his eyes. Hi viewers, have you ever been in a moment where you were completely exhausted, and all you wanted was for the world to just stop for a second? He didn't hear the click, but he felt the change. The air shifted first. Then, the lights came on. Every single one of them. Overhead fluorescence. The bar back lights. The low pendant lamps over the booths. All of it. At once. Khyven's eyes flew open. He pressed himself flat against the cabinet, heart slamming, trying to become nothing, trying to make himself small enough to disappear into the floor. He stopped breathing. And then, 3 shadows fell across the bar floor. 3 of them, standing at the main entrance. Not moving, just stopped. All 3 of them stopped. The moment they saw the blood. Nobody spoke. That was the first thing that threw him. Khyven had been found before. Twice. The first time, there was shouting before the door was even fully open. The second time, hands had grabbed him before his eyes could adjust to the light. This was different. These 3 men stood at the entrance of their own bar, which a stranger had just broken into and bled all over, and they said nothing. They just looked. The one in the center was the tallest. Dark gray jacket, hands loose at his sides. His eyes moved from the blood trail to the counter with the kind of stillness that didn't come from shock. Came from control. Like his brain was already 3 steps ahead of his face. That was Zarek. The one on his right moved first, not toward Khyven but sideways, 1 slow step to the left, eyes scanning the rest of the room, checking corners, reading exits. His jaw was set hard, and there was something sharp in his expression, like skepticism that had long since graduated into suspicion. That was Vale. The third one didn't move at all. He stood slightly behind the other two, and his eyes never left the counter. Not the blood trail. Not the broken lock on the side door. Not the overturned barstool Khyven had knocked on his way in. Just the counter. Like he already knew something was behind it. That was Kairos. Power doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it just watches. Khyven pressed himself harder against the cabinet. His shoulder screamed at him. He ignored it. He had two options. Stay still and hope they didn't come around the bar. Or move and show them exactly where he was. He stayed still. Zarek took 3 steps forward. Slow. Even. No urgency, no threat in the stride. Just a man walking through his own space with the kind of ease that said he owned every inch of it and had never once questioned that fact. He stopped at the edge of the counter. Vale moved along the far wall, eyes still tracking the room. Kairos remained where he was. Khyven's lungs were burning. He hadn't taken a full breath in 30 seconds. Then Zarek crouched down. One knee on the floor. His eyes cleared the top of the counter. And they found Khyven. Just like that. No drama. No shout. They found each other. Khyven waited for the anger. Waited for the grab, the curse, the hand coming down. Zarek looked at him for a long moment. His expression didn't shift into rage. It shifted into something else. Something Khyven didn't have a name for. From across the room, Vale's voice cut through the silence, flat and certain. He shouldn't be here. Khyven's whole body tensed. There it was. That was the line he knew. The one that always came before the part that hurt. His hand pressed into the floor, ready to push up, ready to run even though his feet had already failed him once tonight. Then Zarek moved. Not back. Forward. He lowered himself fully onto one knee, eye level now, and when he spoke, his voice was so quiet it barely reached the counter. Who did this to you? Khyven's mouth didn't move. It never moved. Not anymore. Not in the way most people expected. No words, no sound. Nothing that could be taken and used against him later. He just stared. And Zarek waited. That was the second thing that threw him. The man waited. He didn't repeat the question. Didn't raise his voice. Didn't reach for him. He just held the space between them open, like he understood that silence wasn't refusal. Kairos appeared at the far end of the counter. He came around it the long way, deliberately, Khyven realized, giving him the full arc of his approach so nothing would feel like a sneak. He set something down on the bar top without a word. First aid kit. White box, red cross, already unlatched. Then he crouched down too. Not as close as Zarek. Far enough away that Khyven could see both of them at once. Kairos looked at the wound on Khyven's left side. His eyes moved with the focused quiet of someone cataloging information rather than reacting to it. He reached into the kit, took out gauze, and then he stopped. He looked up at Khyven first. Actually looked. Waiting for something. Khyven didn't move. Kairos took that as the answer it was, and moved slowly, carefully, pressing the gauze to the edge of the wound with pressure that was firm but not rough. Khyven's whole body flinched anyway. He couldn't help it. It wasn't the pain. It was the touch. The first kindness after pain doesn't feel safe. It feels suspicious. His brain kept running the math, looking for what this was going to cost, what they were going to ask for, what the angle was, because there was always an angle. That was the only rule that had never failed him. Kairos kept his hands steady and didn't react to the flinch. From the other side of the room, Vale leaned against the wall by the front window, arms crossed. He wasn't watching Khyven. He was watching the street. Khyven noticed that. He noticed how Vale's gaze moved, systematic, not restless, left to right, near to far, like a man who did not scare easily but also did not take chances. There was something almost protective in it, even if the man himself would probably never use that word. Zarek hadn't moved from where he knelt. He wasn't in the way. He wasn't crowding. He was just present. Close enough to matter. Far enough that Khyven still had room to breathe. The gauze pulled tight for a moment, and Khyven hissed through his nose. The only sound he'd made since they found him. Kairos paused. Waited. Kept going. Khyven's head dropped back against the cabinet again. He stared at the underside of the bar counter. Old wood, scratched up from years of use. Someone had carved something into it once. He couldn't read it from this angle. His breathing started to slow. Not from calm. From exhaustion. He'd been running for so long. His body didn't have anything left to panic with. He stayed. Not because he trusted them. Because he had nothing left to run on. But somewhere in the stillness something changed. His nose caught it before his brain could explain it. Their scent. He'd been so focused on surviving, so wired for threat, that he hadn't processed it until now. It wasn't hostile. Not aggressive. Not marking. Not the sharp chemical edge he'd spent 2 years learning to fear. It was just present. And that terrified him more than aggression ever had. Because he didn't know what to do with something that wasn't trying to own him. His eyes moved to the front of the bar. To the window just past where Vale stood. The street outside was empty. Or it had been. Car had pulled up. Slow. Dark. No lights. Just sitting there. Engine still running. Khyven saw it before any of them did. The reflection in the mirrored back bar. Between the bottles. Between the amber and the dark. The car sat at the curb like it had all night. Like it already knew where he was. His chest locked up. Kairos felt the sudden tension in his body and pulled back immediately, giving him space without being asked. Khyven's eyes stayed on the reflection. Dark SUV. Tinted windows. No plates on the front. He knew that car. Not the specific one. They rotated vehicles. But he knew the shape of it. The way it idled. The way the people inside it never moved until they were ready. And when they were ready, they moved fast and they moved all at once. He'd been registered since age 11. Some cages don't have bars. They have signatures. His was filed in 3 different systems. Legal name. Designation. Current owner of record. He had run from that last part. And that was the part they'd never forgive. In this world, an Omega without a contract wasn't free. They were lost property. And lost property got recovered. The contract system had been in place for decades, dressed up in the language of protection and structure, of stability and care. On paper, it was a framework, a legal assignment of responsibility, the kind of thing that sounded reasonable if you'd never been on the wrong side of it. In practice, it meant someone else held the documents to your life. It meant permission to work, to travel, to refuse. It meant you signed nothing because you were what got signed. Khyven had been forced to comply for so long, he'd almost forgotten there was a version of himself that existed before the paperwork. The memories came in flashes. A room with no window. A meal slid under a door. A man who never raised his voice but whose silence was its own punishment. Commands delivered like weather, not cruel, just constant. Do this. Stand here. Don't ask. He'd stopped asking early. He'd stopped trying to explain himself even earlier. That was when he went quiet. Not mute from birth. Mute from learning. He taught himself silence like other people taught themselves to walk. One step at a time until it became the only thing that felt safe. Outside, the car didn't move. It didn't need to. It was tracking, not chasing. There was a difference. Chasers made noise. Trackers waited until you had nowhere else to go. Vale turned from the window. His eyes cut toward Khyven with a new kind of sharpness. Not anger, but recognition. They're parked on Linwood. He said it to Zarek. But his eyes stayed on Khyven. Zarek didn't look at the window. He looked at Khyven. Just watching. Calculating. Khyven understood what was happening. He understood it in the way you understand a verdict before it's read out loud. They were going to weigh the risk. They were going to decide it wasn't worth it. They were going to step aside and let the car do what the car came to do. And Khyven was going to let that happen because this was how it always went, because this was the part where the kindness ran out, because nothing in his entire life had ever taught him to expect anything different. He pressed one hand flat against the floor, pushed himself up slowly, one foot, then the other. His left heel screamed at him. He didn't make a sound. He started toward the side door, the one he'd come through, the one with the broken lock, moving with the focused calm of someone who had already accepted the outcome. He didn't ask permission. He didn't look back. He just moved, until he couldn't. Zarek was in the way, not blocking aggressively, not with his hands out. He was just standing there, between Khyven and the door, saying nothing, not stepping aside. Khyven stopped. He looked at Zarek. Zarek looked back. Neither of them moved. Khyven's jaw was tight. His hands, still shaking from the cold, from blood loss, from 2 years of running, curled slowly at his sides. He wasn't going to beg. He hadn't begged in a long time. He stared. Zarek stared back. And then, in a voice so low it almost didn't register as sound, "You don't have to run tonight." Khyven blinked. That was it. No conditions. No angle. No list of what he'd have to do in return. Just that. 7 words. Freedom is terrifying when you've never been allowed to choose. He didn't know what to do with 7 words. His whole life had been transactions. You stay, you obey. You comply, you eat. You disappear, you survive. Every single interaction came with a cost attached to the back of it. 7 words with nothing behind them. Nothing visible anyway. His eyes moved to Vale. Vale was already shaking his head. "This brings war." Vale's voice was flat. Not emotional, just factual, like he was reading a forecast. "You know who runs those contracts. You know what they'll do when they find out we're involved." Zarek didn't answer him. Kairos spoke. Quiet. Certain. "It already has." That landed different. Not a debate. Not a prediction. A statement. Like the war wasn't something coming. It was already here, already breathing, already parked on Linwood Street with its engine running and its lights off. Khyven's eyes cut back to Zarek. Zarek still hadn't moved. And something about that, something about the absolute stillness of the man, the fact that he was not grabbing, not commanding, not filling the air with reasons why Khyven owed him something. Something about it made Khyven's throat go tight in a way that had nothing to do with injury. He stood there, halfway between the door and the counter, between running and staying, between the only thing he knew and the thing he had no name for. The silence stretched, and then it broke. 3 sharp knocks at the front door. Not frantic, not aggressive, measured. Like whoever was on the other side had done this before and had no reason to be nervous about it. Vale went still. Kairos turned toward the sound. Zarek's eyes stayed on Khyven. Not on the door. On him. Like that was the only thing that mattered right now. The knocks came again. Then a voice. Male. Even. Carrying the particular authority of someone who had been given permission, legal, official, documented permission. To be exactly as certain as he sounded. "We know he's in there." The door came open before anyone told it to. Not kicked. Not forced. A key. They had a key. That was the part that hit different. 2 men stepped through the entrance. Both in dark jackets. Both moving the way people move when they've done this exact thing before and stopped finding it interesting. The third followed. Older. Heavier. The kind of man who lets the room do the work of announcing him. Zarek didn't move from the spot where he stood. Didn't step back. Didn't reach for anything. He just turned toward them and waited. Real power doesn't need to prove itself. It enforces itself. Vale shifted position without being told. Angling toward the right side of the room, cutting off the line between the agents and the back counter. Not aggressive. Just there. Kairos didn't move at all. He was still crouched near the end of the bar. first aid kit beside him. His eyes tracked the older man the way you track something that has already made a decision and is just now getting around to telling you. The older man, broad shoulders, gray at the temples, a face that had learned not to show anything, scanned the room once. His eyes stopped on the blood trail, followed it, found the counter. He didn't look surprised. "We're not here for trouble," he said. Vale let out a short breath through his nose. That was the whole response. The older man didn't react to it. He looked at Zarek. "You know what he is." Zarek said nothing. "You know what he costs." Still nothing. "You're smart men." The older man's voice was even, almost reasonable, like a math teacher explaining why the answer was wrong. "This doesn't need to become something bigger than it already is. Hand him over. Walk away. We'll call the lock a minor incident." One of the agents had been moving slow, angling around the bar. Kairos stood up. That was all. Just stood. The agent stopped. Vale took 2 steps forward. Not rushing, just repositioning, putting himself between the older man and the back counter with the quiet precision of someone who had calculated all possible distances and found the math to his liking. The older man's jaw tightened. "He's legally ours." Pause on that. Legally. That word. Used in a place like this at 3 in the morning over a person bleeding on the floor. Zarek finally moved. 1 step forward. His voice came out low and level and absolutely certain. "Not anymore." The older man looked at Zarek for a long moment. Then he nodded. Once. Slow. Like that was the answer he'd expected all along. And like it changed everything. They left. No argument. No escalation. No second threat delivered on the way out the door. They just left. And that was worse. The quiet that followed felt like the 5 seconds after lightning before the thunder comes. Vale turned around. "You understand what you just did?" It wasn't a question. Zarek picked up a stool that had been knocked over during the standoff and set it upright. "Yeah, those contracts are held by the Harlan Syndicate." Vale's voice was controlled, but just barely. "DeMarco Harlan specifically. You know his name. You know what his name means." "I know." "He will not send men next time." Vale pressed 2 fingers against the bar top. "He will send a message. The kind you don't recover from." Kairos looked up. "If we erase the contract." "I know how to erase it." Vale cut in. "Then you know it can be done." "That's not what I said." Sometimes saving 1 person means breaking rules that hurt thousands. That's not an easy math problem. Because the rules don't just hurt 1 person, they're a system, and systems push back. Zarek looked at Kaivan. Kaivan was still behind the counter. Still on the floor, technically, though he'd pulled himself into a better position. His back against the cabinet. Kairos's gauze pressed to his side. His feet still bare. He was watching all 3 of them. Like he was waiting to learn which version of this story he was actually in. Nobody had asked him anything. Nobody had told him to move, to speak, to make a decision. That alone was enough to make him feel like the ground had shifted under him. Zarek crouched down again. Same position as before. Eye level. Nothing forced about it. "You're staying here tonight." Kaivan looked at him. "Not a command," Zarek added, like he'd read something in the look. "You can leave if you want." The doors unlocked now. Kaivan didn't move. He didn't leave. He wasn't sure why. Hours passed. The bar stayed dark except for the back shelf lights. Vale sat at a table near the window, one hand resting on the surface, eyes moving to the street every few minutes without being obvious about it. Kairos cleaned up the blood trail with a kind of quiet focus that didn't feel clinical. Felt careful. Like the act of erasing evidence of what had happened to Kaivan was something worth taking seriously. Kaivan watched from the corner and thought about that. He'd been cleaned up before, patched up, put back together by people who needed him functional. This wasn't that. He started watching them differently, not with trust, Not yet, but differently. The shift started somewhere in his chest. Small, confused, not fully formed. Then Kairos sat back on his heels and said, quietly, almost to himself, "The contract can be erased. There's a legal window. 48 hours after an unauthorized transfer of custody, the original contract becomes contestable." The room went still. Vale raised his eyes from the street, looked at Kairos. "If we do that," Vale said slowly. Kairos met his gaze. "They won't stop," Vale finished. 3 days passed. No attack. No contact. Nothing. That was almost harder to sit with than the fight itself. The bar stayed closed. No customers. No staff. Just the four of them moving around each other in the low light and the particular quiet that builds when people are waiting for something they can't see yet. Safety isn't loud. It's the absence of fear. Kaivan didn't know what to do with absence. His whole life had been full of presence, of commands, of eyes watching him, of footsteps behind him, of the weight of other people's decisions pressing down on every hour. This felt like being handed a room with no furniture. He didn't know where to stand. Zarek brought food out in the mornings. No announcement. No delivery speech. He'd set a plate at the near end of the bar top, Kaivan's end, the spot he'd claimed without being told to, and then he'd walk away. Sometimes it was eggs. Sometimes it was just toast and coffee. One morning it was both. Kaivan sat on the stool and ate slowly and tried not to read anything into it. He read everything into it. Kairos adjusted the lights on the third morning. Kaivan hadn't said anything about them, hadn't said anything about anything because he didn't talk, and they seemed to have accepted that without making it into a project. But the overhead fluorescence had been too harsh, and somehow Kairos knew that, and he'd switched to the pendant lamps and the warm amber bar lights without a word of explanation. Kaivan stared at the changed light for a long time. He didn't understand how someone could notice that. He'd been invisible for so long that the idea of someone seeing a preference, a small, unspoken preference, and adjusting for it felt almost disorienting. Vale kept distance. Not coldly, just honestly. He didn't offer conversation. He didn't pretend they were something they weren't. But twice Kaivan caught him checking the lock on the side door, the broken one Kaivan had come through, and he'd repaired it properly, not just jammed it shut. From the inside, so that it locked from within. So that no one could get in the same way Kaivan had come in. That matters. On the fourth afternoon, Kaivan sat at the bar while Zarek read something on a tablet across the room. The room was quiet, warm, still. Kaivan's hand rested on the bar top. He looked at it. Then he looked at Zarek. His hand moved a fraction of an inch. Toward him. Just a fraction. Then it stopped. He pulled it back. Set it in his lap. Stared forward. His jaw was tight. His chest was tighter. He didn't understand himself right now, and that was its own kind of terrifying. Zarek didn't look up from his tablet. But something in his expression shifted. The corner of his mouth moved. Not a smile. Something quieter than that. Then, the windows on the east side of the bar lit up. White and orange at the same time for just 1 second. Before the sound came, the explosion cracked through the street like something had been waiting to exhale. Glass rattled. One pendant lamp swung hard. Vale was on his feet before the echo finished. War had arrived. The second explosion was closer. It came from the north side, the alley that ran behind the kitchen, and the whole building shuddered with it, a low, bone-deep vibration that knocked 2 bottles off the back shelf and sent them spinning across the floor. Zarek moved fast. Not frantic. Fast. There's a difference. Back room. He said it once, directly at Kaivan. Not shouted. Not pleading. Just clear. Kaivan didn't hesitate. He moved. The back room was a storage area. Shelves of dry goods, a locked office, one small window that looked onto a service alley. Kaivan pressed himself against the wall beside the door, away from the window, and listened. What he heard outside was organized. That was the part that stuck with him. It wasn't chaos. It was structured aggression, men calling out positions, coordinating movement, the sound of boots on pavement that had a rhythm to it. The Harlan Syndicate didn't send angry men. They sent trained ones. No one had ever fought for him before. Not once. Not ever. Not in any of the places he'd been or any of the hands he'd passed through. When he became a problem, people let go. That was the rule. That was how it always ended. He pressed his back flat to the wall and told himself not to listen. He listened to every single thing. The front door hit the frame hard once, then it gave. Vale's voice cut through the noise. Low and sharp. Then silence. Not the silence of defeat. The silence of two people measuring each other. Khyven moved to the door. Just enough to see through the gap. Vale stood in the middle of the bar floor. For men spread across the entrance. Vale looked at the one in front and said something Khyven couldn't fully hear. But whatever it was, the man responded by taking a step forward. Vale caught the arm, redirected, and the man hit the bar counter hard enough to make the bottles rattle again. Took 3 seconds. The other 3 moved at once. Kairos came from the left side of the room, where he'd been the whole time, Khyven realized, positioned there before the door even opened, and the first thing he did wasn't hit anyone. He reached out, and he disarmed. Quiet. Precise. Like removing a piece from a chessboard. One weapon gone. Then another. Then Zarek was in the room. Khyven watched him and felt something land in his chest that he didn't have a label for yet. Zarek moved through the space with the kind of controlled force that didn't waste itself. No extra motions. No performance. He engaged, he ended it, he moved to the next one. The whole fight lasted less than 2 minutes. When it was over, the 3 men still standing near the entrance looked at each other. Zarek. Back at each other. And they left. The room was a wreck. Glass on the floor. One table overturned. The east window cracked straight through. Vale stood in the center of it all with a cut along his jaw and a look on his face like a man who had won the argument but was already thinking about the next one. Kairos picked up the weapons he'd taken. Zarek turned toward the back room. And Khyven was already there, standing in the doorway, not hiding. He'd walked out on his own. He didn't know exactly when he'd decided to. Just that at some point between the first explosion and the moment Zarek turned around, hiding had started to feel like the wrong thing. Like it didn't fit anymore. Zarek looked at him. Something passed between them. Nothing was said. Nothing needed to be. Then smoke curled under the back door. Thin at first. Then not. Vale turned. Saw it. East walls on fire. They got out. All 4 of them. Through the front, Vale moving first, clearing the street, Kairos right behind with a hand near Khyven's shoulder. Not grabbing, just present, and Zarek last, because Zarek was always last. The bar burned behind them. Not completely. The fire department got there fast enough to save the structure. But the east wall was gone, and the back room was a wreck, and the space that had been a quiet shelter for 4 days was now something else. Open. Exposed. Known. That was the cost. They stood across the street while the hoses worked, and the smoke rolled gray against the early morning sky, and none of them said anything for a long time. Vale's jaw was set. Kairos watched the fire the way he watched everything, with attention that didn't tip into emotion. Zarek stood with his hands in his jacket pockets. Khyven stood beside them. Not behind them. Beside. That was new. He noticed it. Within 72 hours, the legal process moved. Kairos knew the right people. Or more accurately, the right people knew Kairos and owed him enough to move fast when he asked. The contract was flagged. The 48-hour window was filed. 3 attorneys in 2 different jurisdictions signed off on the contested transfer. By the time DeMarco Harlan's lawyers responded, it was already processed. Khyven's registration was voided. No current owner of record. No assigned contract. No legal designation of property. He was, for the first time in his memory, exactly and only himself. Freedom isn't just being safe. It's becoming someone new. That part was harder than he expected. The syndicate filed challenges. 2 of them were dismissed before noon. The third one lingered for 11 days before a judge ruled against it. During those 11 days, the 3 of them moved operations, pulled back from public exposure, kept Kaivan out of any system that could be used to locate him. They gave him a room, clean, small, a window that faced a courtyard. They gave him the door code and told him the code could be changed anytime he wanted. He didn't change it. He left it as it was. He wasn't sure what that meant. On the 12th day, Zarek walked into the room. Kaivan was sitting at the small table by the window. Zarek stopped near the door. He looked at Kaivan the same way he always looked at him, direct, no performance. "It's done," he said. "Legally. Fully. You're clear." Kaivan looked at him. "You can leave," Zarek said. "There's nothing holding you. No contract, no obligation. You can go anywhere you want." He meant it. That was the thing. Kaivan could hear it, not as a script or a line, but as a true and offered thing. An open door. Real choice, handed over without conditions. He looked at Zarek for a long time. Then he looked out the window, at the courtyard, at the morning light sitting flat and clean against the brick walls. He thought about the night he'd come through that broken lock. Barefoot, bleeding, already decided. He thought about the floor under his hands, the cold moving up through his palms, the silence that had stretched on and on until 3 shadows walked through a door. He stood up. He walked out of the room, down the short hall, into the main space where Vale was at a table with paperwork and Kairos was at the counter with coffee, and the whole place smelled like morning and something close to ordinary. He pulled out the stool at the near end of the counter. His end. The spot he'd claimed. He sat down. Nobody said anything. Vale didn't look up from his paperwork. Kairos slid a cup of coffee across the counter without being asked. Kaivan wrapped both hands around it. He stared at the bar top, at the scratched wood, at the grain running through it that looked different depending on the light. He sat there in the quiet, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, the quiet felt like his. Not absence. Not waiting for something to go wrong. Just his. For the first time, he wasn't hiding from the world. He was deciding if he was ready to live in it. And that, right there, was the most terrifying and honest thing he had ever felt. If the story moved you, if you found yourself holding your breath in that bar with Kaivan, or hoping someone would finally choose to stay, drop a comment and tell us which moment hit hardest for you. Was it when Zarek blocked the door? When Kairos adjusted the lights without being asked? Or the moment Kaivan sat back down on that stool? Your thoughts matter here. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want to be here when the next story drops, subscribe and turn on notifications. We tell stories about quiet strength, real survival, and the people who choose to stay when everything says to walk away. You don't want to miss what comes next.